Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and if you're struggling to operate Flight Sim with just the DualSense controller on PlayStation 5, then this video is going to be for you, because we'll be looking at an easy way to make it a whole lot better. If you go back to the earliest versions of Flight Sim back in the 90s, we flew with very basic controllers back then, but we did have two other devices to help us, the keyboard and the mouse. The funny thing is, what worked back then still works today, and a keyboard and mouse is the first thing that I would recommend adding to your setup if you're even remotely serious about flight simming. The DualSense controller literally has dozens of combo keys mapped by default, and it feels like it's trying to do too much out of the box, so by plugging in a keyboard and mouse, you can simplify all of that. That means less accidental tripping of double bindings that cause weird problems in the airplane, and it lets you refocus the controller on only the primary flight controls, with the keyboard there to supplement with all the extra key bindings you could ever need. The mouse is also super useful not only to look around, but also to zoom in on instruments, click buttons, and do things that are just plain cumbersome if you try and do it with the DualSense. I found the best way to manage all three controls is to put the keyboard and mouse on a laptop table. Like that, whenever you need either one, it's easy to reach them with your free hand and then use your other hand to continue to handle the controller. If you already have a wireless keyboard and mouse for your computer, there's a decent chance that it might already work with the PS5, especially if it has one of those little USB receivers that the devices connect to. Connecting them via Bluetooth can be a bit touchier, but I found a list of compatible devices online, and I'll make sure to leave the link to that in the description for you. But let's have a look more concretely at how we can take advantage of all of this. I'm really going to be focused here on showing you what I've bound where and why, and just to save on time, if you want to set yours up in a similar way, you can pause the video at any point to see the bindings that I've used. And just to set expectations, this video isn't meant as a full guide to the binding system, but there are a few things that I'll point out towards the end of the controller section that'll help you out if you run into issues trying to switch them out like I suggest. Now, like I was saying earlier, I've made the DualSense focus only on the most important controls for flying, so the left analog stick still controls the ailerons and elevator axes like it does in the default bindings. One thing I did change was in the hardware settings for both of these axes. I find it to be way too sensitive by default, and to address that, I added in a fairly large extremity dead zone to smooth it all out. The extremity dead zone cuts out the last 20% off both ends of the axis, so it reduces the amount of travel for it as a whole, and if you still find it too sensitive, you could also add a tiny bit of a curve to it to smooth out the mid-range even more. The right analog stick is for looking around by default, and it's one of the only controls I haven't changed at all, so you can use it to look around wherever you want and press on it to reset your view back to the center. I've also left L2 and R2, which are used for rudder control left and right as is, but I've added a curve to the sensitivities again here for them because by default they move the rudder a lot with just a tiny change. The sensitivity curve cushions that middle part of the range out a little bit more, and along with the extremity dead zone that I've added, it makes for a much more precise rudder control. Let's look at our four main buttons next, and I ended up swapping out all of these because I wasn't happy with how it worked by default. The way that I like to think of it is that the top two buttons are grouped together to perform a given action, and the bottom two are also grouped together as well. So like that, I've set up the X button to decrease throttle and the O button to increase throttle because it feels more natural and similar to pushing the throttle in with the higher button and out with the lower button. The top two buttons are what I use for the trim, so the triangle is the nose down trim button and the square is the nose up trim, again to replicate how the controls in the actual plane would work. The buttons on the left side of the controller are set up in a similar way, so I grouped the top and left buttons together for a given action, and the bottom and right ones for a different action. With that in mind, I'm using the right and down buttons to decrease and increase the flaps, which again replicates the action you do in the plane for the most part, if you were to imagine the buttons being one above the other. The mixture controls are the next thing that you're often going to be playing with in a piston plane, so I've assigned the top and left keys to enrich and lean the mixture. I use L1 for retracting gear on airplanes that have retractable gear, and R1 for brakes once I touch down, but there's one thing you have to be really careful about with both of these two keys. I mentioned earlier how there are dozens of combo keys bound to the controller, and a lot of them are done with L1 and R1 in combination with another button on the controller. This is where you can get in trouble because you can accidentally do two things at once when you don't mean to. So for example, if I'm hitting the brakes and reducing power at the same time because I'm coming into land, I could accidentally trigger something else by hitting those two buttons together. The same is actually true for individual button presses as well, since each button is often bound to multiple actions by default. The number on the right side of the cell here tells you how many things are bound to that button press, so it's always a good idea if you see a number here to check and delete anything that might cause you issues. For example, if I'm accidentally triggering this view change when I don't want it to because I'm actually doing something else entirely, I can click on the gear icon next to it right here and then scroll down to the delete assigned control option to get rid of it. Let's move on to the keyboard, which gives you the ability to bind pretty much anything you could ever need, but I've got a few suggestions here to help moving around inside the plane, which is something that the DualSense does really poorly on its own. What I recommend is mapping the WASD keys to move around the cockpit, which are traditionally used for moving around in first-person shooters, so it feels very natural. In the bindings menu, that turns out to be the translate cockpit view forward, backward, left, and right bindings. Sometimes you also need to get a bit higher or lower to see out of the windows properly, so what I've also done is map the E and Q keys to increase the cockpit view height and decrease the cockpit view height. That gives us all the degrees of freedom we need to move around inside the plane now, which on its own is super useful, but on top of this, we can also set up a bunch of preset cameras to quickly move around from place to place. One of the best features of the camera system is that it has 10 custom camera views that you can save wherever you want in the plane, and the way a lot of us have set this up is to use the number keys on your keyboard for them. What I've done is gone through all of the load camera bindings from 0 to 9 and mapped each of them to the equivalent number key on my keyboard. So like that, all of my custom camera views are always just one tap away. Now we also need a way to save the custom views wherever we want them, so what I've done is map the shift key plus the equivalent number key to save each camera's position. Each of those cameras can be saved and loaded very easily with the keyboard now, so all you need to do is place yourself wherever you want a camera view, you save it, and whenever you want to get back there, you press the same number pad key. The way I've set it up is that I've got a few camera views dedicated to looking at the instruments, but I also have a few to look out the windows a little bit everywhere. I found the layout that I'm showing you on screen to be the easiest to remember since it's very close to being a top-down view of where each camera is located in the plane, but there's obviously no right or wrong answer here. We're not quite done with the camera views yet. There's one last thing that I like to bind, and that's to easily swap between the cockpit and the external camera view. I bound the enter key to do that, and it just makes it super easy to pop out whenever you want to get a nice screenshot and then come back into the cockpit to continue flying. That's nowhere near the end of what you can do with the keyboard bindings, obviously, but I think you get the idea that with the keyboard you'll have a much more reliable way to access anything you could need throughout a flight. As for the mouse itself, it's obviously a huge game changer to zoom in and access cockpit features, but it makes navigating around the menus so much simpler as well, and I would say it's just as valuable as the keyboard. I hope this is going to help all of you new PS5 simmers to get more out of your flight simming experience, and if you learned something useful today, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this one.